So now the big headlines all over are about 99% of the money is back, and people are thinking this is a big piece of news. Frankly, I told you so. 48 hours after demonetization was announced, I wrote that almost the entire money would come back. Now, I'm not a Jyotishi or an astrologer. What I was basing my judgment on was a very simple thing: human behavior. I think the architects of the demonetization scheme looked too much at finance and economics and not that much at human behavior or human psychology. When you tell a person that your wealth has been reduced to zero, or you can salvage a part of it in some way or the other, that person will do anything, hook or crook, to salvage that. So if I have 100 rupees which was unaccounted for, and if someone came and told me that, well, I'll give you back 70 and I'll figure out a way of taking care of the 30, I would agree. So it was very clear to me that one way or another, by spending, by buying assets, by paying someone for conversion, by giving cash to somebody who had cash entries in his or her book, one way or another, it was very clear to me that the money would find its way back into the system, because the option of destroying wealth is something that human beings would not accept. So was there a better way of implementing this scheme? Now, I know that all of us are much wiser after the event, but remember, I had written much earlier that there was a much simpler, far more effective, efficient way of doing this, with all the endpoints achieved, with much more revenue accruing to the government rather than that kind of money getting frittered in corruption or going to corrupt bank managers or to people who were willing to convert your cash. A lot of the money went into those very sleazy areas. Frankly, all of that money could have actually come into the government if the scheme had been made as follows. The tenure of the scheme should have been very short, say 15 days. In 15 days, you have to deposit your money or your money goes to zero, number one. Number two, there was a one-time final conversion tax of say 40%. So if you give 100 rupees to the bank, 40% would go to the government coffers as taxes. So one time combined with demonetization. I think the architects of the scheme missed this very powerful combination, that if you had combined demonetization with a one-time conversion tax, then a person would have thought twice about taking a sleazy route. That would have been a win-win. And the fact that you would have kept the scheme open only for 15 days means that people wouldn't have had to go through, poor people, middle class, wouldn't have had to go through the pain that they had to suffer for about 6 or 7 weeks. Of course, this is predicated on the fact that you would not make the mistakes of having different size notes which were not compatible with ATM compartments. I'm assuming all of that would have been planned through, i.e. the note sizes should have stayed same. You would have printed much more 500 rupee note in the beginning than 2000 rupee note. You would have flooded smaller towns and villages where digital cash is not used as much with cash before announcing demonetization. Had all of this been done, exactly the same end point would have been achieved with much less pain, much more money flowing into government's tax coffers, much less corruption. And this is not something that I'm saying with the wisdom of hindsight. I had written about this within about 10 or 15 days of demonetization. Okay, now it seems as if that the state did not do anything right. I'm not saying that at all. I think after 9 months, you need to have a much more nuanced understanding of what happened. Do remember, it was an audacious move, politically, economically audacious move. The world hadn't quite seen something like this. So I think when you launch something as audacious as what was done, there were bound to be unintended consequences. Now, the fact that the government managed to remonetize the economy within about 4 or 5 months, I think that's creditable, because the first estimates were that remonetization could take 8 or 9 months. The fact that a lot of the informal economy was coerced to come into the formal economy. A lot of people left digital trails about unaccounted cash, which the government is now looking at. They've talked about how there are about 1.8 lakh crores, which is looking suspicious money to them. Now, my point is, we could have done that without the coercion. But the fact is that even with coercion, when this kind of a digital trail of suspicious money is now available to the lawmakers, I think all of that is positive. So there's also been some criticism about the fact that should we be making such a drastic push, almost coercing people into a cashless economy. Now, I think there are 2 or 3 things here. cashless economy is a concomitant. It's an outcome of economic development. You should not put the cart before the horse. You should not first say, I will go cashless and then I will economically develop. So, frankly, economic development would create a cashless economy by itself. But since you did use coercive methods and the propensity to use digital cash necessarily had to become higher because there was no physical cash in the economy, that you can count as an unintended benefit of such a strong coercive move. But frankly, I believe it's an organic thing. It happens when economies develop, and if we focus ourselves on a well-rounded economic growth path, then the move towards a cashless economy would be a natural, organic one. Clearly, the most cruel impact was in the informal economy, which is the largest part of India's economy. For the poor people, for farmers, it happened at the peak of the agriculture season. They were not allowed to exchange their cash at district cooperative banks. They were not allowed to use and pay for pesticides and inputs. And you know, clearly the big cruel impact happened at the poor people. And that was something, as I said, was avoidable simply because if you had kept the tenure only 15 days and ensured that there was enough cash available in smaller denomination notes, 500 and 100 instead of 2000 in the rural areas, you could have avoided that pain. But the fact is that that sector has gone through pain. That sector has still not recovered because supply chains were completely disrupted. I think it's terribly important now to get more focus for the government going in there to ensure that the disrupted supply chains are back, and then to use the disruption actually as a means of reforming your agriculture mandis, reforming your farm to fork supply lines. It was an extremely cruel, adverse move, but as with every adversity, there is an opportunity, and in the government, if it really focuses its energies on repairing that completely devastated and disrupted supply chain, then there would be a benefit eventually from it. Now to the biggest conundrum of demonetization. When it was done and people saw the pain that was there, everybody thought that it would be politically devastating for the ruling party. But exactly the opposite happened. It became a strong political weapon in the armory of the government. And I think it's important to understand why that happened. The sheer audacity of the move was supported by people because people felt that here is a genuine attempt at trying to break the status quo. So that they applauded. Indians are a very stoic people. We are a people who have been told and brought up on the fact that you must suffer, you must do penance to cleanse yourself. So I think a lot of the country saw that as necessary suffering to cleanse. That messaging was also very powerfully imparted by the ruling party, especially Prime Minister Modi. And I think people bought into that message. So I think politically what could have been an extremely devastating move for the government actually turned out to be beneficial and in a sense was lucky for the government because that rode on the innate stoicism of Indians. They are used to suffering. They have been taught that suffering is cleansing. And I think they saw that this suffering was going to result in something good. So the stoicism of the Indian people turned out to be politically lucky for the government. And to be fair to the government also built on that narrative of suffering leading to cleansing.